Welcome into the Fantasy Focus Football Podcast. We are presented by Geico. Switch to Geico and see all the ways that you could save. Happy November 1st. Field and Stephania here on a Tuesday morning. Good morning, Stephania.
Morning, Field. It's just you and me.
We are on to week 9. Can you believe
Holding
it?
down the fort.
Holding down the fort, which we have no idea the origins of that.
No, we
did find out the origins.
We did find out the origins.
Not sure that I still totally understand why they landed on that as an expression. That means that we are here and holding it down, but we are holding down a fort metaphorically here on the podcast today. As I mentioned, November, which means that 1 week from now, we will be halfway through the NFL regular season.
You say you're bunny, rabbit?
Of course. First thing I did. Okay. Yeah, as a matter of
Same.
Would never miss a month. Hopefully good luck is upon all of us,
and we're
including you and your fantasy teams.
Through the season.
Yeah,
basically.
It's crazy. Yeah, it is just remarkable. The NFL trade deadline is later on today. We're hopeful for some news because it's fun. We'll give you any if we have any during the show.
Just a reminder, our Field Yates hosting the NFL trade deadline special this afternoon.
So if you're watching this now, if you're watching this right now, or if you're listening to it early after it hits wherever you get your podcast, 3 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN, myself, Shefty, Mort, Tannenbaum, Lewis Riddick, it's a whole crew of people that will get you ready, hopefully for some action leading up to the NFL trade deadline. We're going to talk waiver wires with Eric Moody in a bit, but let's begin with some injury news here, Stephania, and talk about superstars. There are some superstars who got banged up during their game this past week, whether it was Thursday or Sunday. Let's visit those that we know a little bit more about. Let's begin with Cooper Kupp because there were a lot of people, myself included, that were wondering why he was on the field late in the game when his team was getting drubbed by your 49ers. Sean McVay immediately regretted the decision. What's going on with his ankle?
Yeah, Sean McVay had to explain that one away. That he said he felt terribly about having Cooper Kupp out there late in the fourth quarter of Sunday's game. He got rolled up on. I actually thought it might have been both ankles at first, but dealing with what looked like a sprained ankle. Very interesting wording by the Rams that he has lateral soft tissue swelling, but no structural injury. So my interpretation of that means he has swelling, just like you see with a basketball ankle sprain, because on the lateral side, but not enough to have complete disruption of a ligament, which is good news because it means Cooper Kupp could be available to play this week. In fact, he says he thinks he'll be ready to go on Sunday.
And Sean McVay echoed that as well. So it seems like we were able to avoid a bad scenario here.
By the way, if there's anyone whose work ethic on the rehab side, get ready for Sunday, there's no one better than Cooper Kupp, who is one of the only players to come back the year following an ACL reconstruction and put up similar numbers to everything he did in the year prior.
By the way, Cooper Kupp just 3 games away from tying Emmitt Smith for the most consecutive games with at least 15 fantasy points in PPR scoring amongst non-quarterbacks like ever. He has just been remarkable. There is no player on the Rams that you can just plug and play if Cooper Kupp is out. Seems like we are in a good spot here. Let's continue to monitor this one throughout the week. Going back to Thursday night, Stephania, Mark Andrews left the game early with a shoulder injury. Any more clarity there?
Not really. They haven't offered up a lot of detail on what it was. You know, he came into last week's game questionable with a knee injury. We weren't sure he was going to play. He ends up leaving the game early. I think it was the second quarter because of a shoulder injury. He's actually dealing with 2 injuries, according to John Harbaugh, his ankle and his shoulder. It sounds like they're hopeful that he might be able to go because he avoided a significant injury. They have the Saints this week and then a bye, so we'll see if Mark Andrews plays. Like, he's a guy who wants to be out there. I mean, he's been pressing through stuff all along. If it's not major, I think he's going to try to go.
And that's good news, right? It's one of those just weird, right? Because you don't know exactly what's going on. He went to the locker room right away. It makes you a little bit nervous. You're thinking to yourself, could this be serious? Good news, it does not seem to be serious. A more serious issue, though, is his teammate, Rashad Bateman.
Yeah, this is not the first week that he had this foot thing. If you go back, he originally injured his foot in week 4. And remember, they called it then a midfoot injury. And you always get nervous about that. Midfoot sprain, sort of the general region of a Lisfranc injury. He missed weeks 5 and 6. Then he comes back in week 7, 4 catches, 42 yards, and he's out of the game, supposedly aggravated the injury. Here's how I take it. When you hear John Harbaugh say that he's going to miss multiple weeks and they're still doing further testing, he may have gone from what's considered a stable midfoot injury to an unstable injury. And that definitely makes you nervous for what the prospects are going forward for the rest of the year. So we will wait and see what further detail comes out of his follow-up testing. But At the very least, it's a multi-week injury for Rashad Bateman.
Yeah, just brutal. He was one of the trendy preseason breakout players in fantasy football, was Bateman, a first-round pick just a year ago. That breakout has not yet occurred, in large part due to the fact that he's had a hard time staying on the field. Devin Duvernay is the next man up for those Ravens wide receivers. Really good as a returner. Also an improving receiver this year. He's available in 71% of leagues. Eric Moody will dive into his value, I believe, during the waiver wire segment at the end of the show. But he does have 10-plus fantasy points in 5 of the Ravens' 8 games. And while the offense is going to run through Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews, assuming he is on the field, and perhaps Isaiah Likely will continue to play a bigger role like he did last week when Andrews got hurt, I think that Devin Duvernay is a name to at least add and stash. Someone has to catch passes out of that wide receiver group. And while this player was not really on the fantasy radar, Stephania, once again, Irv Smith is banged up.
Yeah, he's at least been consistent, right? Averaging 4 catches. You know, he can get you a handful of points each week. Irv Smith, who didn't play last year because of taking the season off after having a meniscus injury, now fearing a high ankle sprain are the Vikings when it comes to Irv Smith. And so, again, if it turns out to be the case, then it will likely be a multi-week absence for him.
Okay, let's hope he is back soon. He's another player that has struggled to stay on the field, has Irv Smith. Johnny Mundt caught a touchdown for the Vikings this past week. Not sure that Mundt is exactly a starting option for you going forward at tight end. Let's recap Monday Night Football, and the Browns did some spooky stuff to the Bengals on Monday Night Football on Halloween. The game was being played in Cleveland, and the Bengals, frankly, laid an egg. We'll go through them quickly, Stephania, but this was a throwaway night for Cincinnati. Oh, my God. He must be over the moon right now, right?
He must have thought it was like a trick on Halloween. Like, there go the Browns. They're leading the game. The Bengals, they mount this pretend comeback.
Yeah. I mean, they got some fantasy points in the fourth quarter, but it did not really matter in the context of the game. Joe Burrow, sort of off. And to be honest, I think the offensive line was more off than Joe Burrow was. But early in the game, the Bengals were kind of driving, and then he throws a pick on a play that Myles Garrett tips, and then his receiver tips it, and then a Browns cornerback named A.J. Green, some irony there, I suppose, picks off Joe Burrow. And it felt to me like from that point forward, they just never really got their offense going. Burrow finishes with just 13.5 fantasy points. Of course, he had been on a tear of late. If you were looking for a Monday night miracle, you kind of thought Burrow might have helped you. Not so much.
He has never beaten the Browns.
Never?
Never beaten the Browns. And it's actually, if you go ESPN Daily, shout out to ESPN Daily, the podcast yesterday, they did, Alex Smith did a sit down with Joe Burrow, and they talked about this. He basically came into the interview and said, Joe, I got to ask you, you're 0-3 against the Browns. And they talked about it, and they talked about Myles Garrett having his number. He's like, yep, every time I face him, Myles Garrett talks about taking down Joe Burrow. He has Joe Burrow in his Halloween display because he could take him down. And he did it again. The Bengals have lost an NFL record 13 straight road primetime games.
Wow. That's not good right there. Who's a really interesting player is Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon is well compensated. I think he's a solid NFL player. I think for fantasy, he is slotted where he deserves to be, which is like a top 12 to 15-ish running back. He had a top 10 finish back in week 1, hasn't had one since. And thank God for his volume, Stephania, because his efficiency continues to be so poor for Joe Mixon. I believe he is now on pace for just over 1,000 rushing yards. He's averaging 3.3 yards per carry.
I know.
Thank God for the pass catching. I don't know if it's the offensive line, but it feels like it's like 4 straight years of this for Joe Mixon.
It feels like that's a big part of it.
Definitely.
There's not really a great place for him to run. I think where he's been the most effective is when they've used him in the red zone as a pass catching option, and then he's bailed you out a little bit. But for the talent that he has, he doesn't perform like that in fantasy.
Yep, he's going to sort of stay where he has been, but I get it. Like, if you're looking for more boom from Joe Mixon, you haven't really gotten it. You're kind of expecting like 12, maybe 15 fantasy points in a given week. The monster games really haven't been there so far this season, and because of that inefficiency running the football, I'm not sure how likely they are to happen very often. We were expecting big things from the 2 wide receivers from the Bengals last night, T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, Stephania. And I mentioned how the offense just kind of got stuck in the mud after that opening drive interception. Never got going after that either.
I mean, they had a couple chances to put points on the board when they had that drive and the pick after the tip pass and then the missed field goal.
Right.
And it felt like they never got back in sync. I don't know if it was like a lack of confidence. Joe Burrow gets sacked a bunch of times, which, that's been par for the course. But T. Higgins, I actually thought Tyler Boyd would have a big game, because he's such a good possession receiver and he's right there in the underneath stuff. You expect Tyler Boyd to catch the ball a lot. I was disappointed. They both had the same number of catches, right? 3 catches.
3 each, yeah. Yeah, so what we have to be careful doing is overreacting and saying, oh, well, Jamar Chase is just that special and that these guys without Jamar Chase aren't capable of stepping up. I mean, I think T. Higgins is a really, really darn good player. We've seen him be awesome in the past. We've also seen Tyler Boyd be awesome in the past. This feels like probably a sample size issue, but you have to hope that next week against the Panthers, frisky Panthers defense, things change because otherwise this could be a problem. Those who are expecting a vault in value did not get it last night.
Jamar Chase is not coming back for a handful of weeks. We don't know when, but at least 4 weeks, right? And so you're not writing off T. Higgins or Tyler Boyd. And I think, T. Higgins, most people already had him if they had him, but Tyler Boyd was somebody who you could have negotiated to get earlier.
Yep.
And I think Tyler Boyd is going to surprise you over the next few games.
Let's certainly hope so. For the Browns, Nick Chubb continues to do Nick Chubb things. What a remarkable player. He has 101 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns. He's one of those few guys that even if he doesn't catch passes, who cares? He now has 841 rushing yards
Best
in 8
pure
games.
runner in the game, I think.
Certainly feels that way. He's on pace for nearly 1,800 rushing yards and 21 rushing touchdowns. Before you say, there's no way he'll get there. I'm not so sure. He's Nick Chubb. The guy is unbelievable. What a joy he is to watch. I always think back to the line about Nick Chubb from Kevin Stefanski that just makes him that much easier to root for. He was talking about guys being high maintenance and low maintenance. And he said, then you got Nick Chubb, who's no maintenance. He's the most humble superstar in the NFL. Love to see him shine.
He and Jim Brown are the only players with this many touchdowns for the first 8 games of a season. When you're in Jim Brown company,
yeah, pretty good.
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, he's
for a Browns player.
Certainly one of the most efficient runners of all time. 5.4 yards per carry for his career. Kareem Hunt got involved a little bit last night as well. Good to see him get 4 catches. That was the part that mattered.
Did you hear because in the post game, one of the reporters asked him, so are you going to still ask for a trade? And he's like, well, I've already done that.
Yeah. He's good. And we'll find out his fate.
Do you think it'll happen?
I would be surprised. We'll find out in the next 5 hours and 45 minutes or so, but I'd be surprised if Kareem Hunt is moved. I'll be honest with you, and I hope I'm wrong here, but I always assume inertia will prevail because the NFL is not the NBA where there are moves all the time, or MLB or NHL. I'm hopeful for 1 or 2. It'll be good for our TV show, but you never know on these NFL days. I kind of always expect that things stay as they are.
There wasn't a huge void created that I saw from Sunday's games that would make me think somebody's going out to pay big money for him.
And running backs are tricky, right? I mean, for every, it's great when you can make a move. For Christian McCaffrey, that's awesome, and you can talk about Christian McCaffrey in a second.
Thank you for working that into the conversation, just so I could hear that.
But at the same time, Stephania, look at some of these players coming out of either nearly nowhere or relative anonymity. They're doing a good job. Tyler Algier has been a serviceable back for the Falcons. Tony Pollard, Ramondre Stevenson, both fourth.
And he got in the end zone this
week. Let's go. I know. He was waiting for a little motivation from me. For the Browns, 2 wide receivers mattered. Amari Cooper had a nice game last night. 5 catches, 131 yards, and a touchdown. If you're like me... But if you're like me and you needed just a little bit more from Amari Cooper and it was the interception that he threw that did you in.
Oh, no, he didn't.
I just want you to know we're not alone. You're not alone.
Did you hear him? He was funny after the game, too, which he could laugh about it since they ended up winning the game. And he had this ridiculous game, 131 yards, and he gets in the end zone. But he said, he was trying to throw it away. And he's like, it's harder than you think to throw the ball away. And he's like, once he realized that he did not throw away, he was like, don't give me any more passes. No more passes for Amari Cooper. No more passes
for Amari Cooper, who, by the way, now has 4 20-point games this season. And then Donovan Peoples-Jones, who actually was pretty solid again last night. He now has 3 straight games up over 11 fantasy points. A deeper league consideration only, but you can see it with DPJ. He's a talented guy that certainly has been good of late for the Cleveland Browns. Keep those names in mind, especially when Deshaun Watson is back on the field, as you expect the offense to be much better. So here's what we wanted to do. We wanted to go through the quarterback, running back, well, just every position, and just run through players and almost like a confidence, like a vibe check on these players, Stephania. I don't need like a dissertation, just sort of a, if this is your starter.
One to give on most of these players.
Some of them there's not. And if it is, it would be a very negative dissertation at that. But if you are looking for a quarterback right now to get you to the finish line, and you don't have a Josh Allen or a Lamar Jackson or a Patrick Mahomes or Jalen Hurts, there are a couple others I think fit into that category, Kyler Murray. And by the way, guys are going to go on bye as well, so you're going to be without them, as is the case for Dak Prescott this week. Let's check in on some of these quarterbacks, and we can go back and forth there, just sort of ping pong with some ideas. So Geno Smith is now quarterback 8 this season, Stephania, with 17.8 points per game. What do you think on Geno Smith?
I think he's probably my top choice to stream if he's available to do it. I mean, I don't know that he is now. People are starting to get smart and pick him up and start him because he's been fairly consistent. Multiple touchdown passes in 5 of his past 6 games. Yeah. That's what you're looking for. He's also been on the move. He's using his legs a bit more than we ever anticipated. Yeah, the legs are helping a bit because I think it's an amazing story. My confidence has not dwindled with Geno Smith, but the upside has sort of decreased a little bit, right? I mean, he has under 215 passing yards in 3 straight games and 5 of his 5 games so far this season. So we haven't seen as much passing yardage from Geno Smith. And if he had even more, then we would be talking about him in a slightly different light. We'd be talking about him as the quarterback that broke through, that could be that top 10 starter. Not quite there yet, but in this climate, it feels like a win to have Geno Smith as your quarterback. We think of Seattle, or did think of Seattle, as just completely run dominant. Yep. And in the last couple of games, we've seen, these passing touchdowns from him, which I think bodes well for, fantasy consistency, I guess. We're trying to find it. If
I were to describe him, and I'll use as a bucket that I'll continue to rely upon, is that way overachieving relative to expectations and a serviceable starting quarterback. Not elite. Not going to crush you, either based off of expectations or based off of name value. I think the next player probably is pretty close to that. And Kirk Cousins, who, solid, Stephania.
Boring.
Quarterback 9, boring. 17.3 fantasy points per game. In his 7 games played, he has at least 16.5 fantasy points in 5 of them. This is a team that is always in close games. Yep. That has continued this year. They have 5-0 in 1-score games, so throwing is usually going to be a thing here for Minnesota. So I think solid.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to carry me to my title.
Nope.
But also in a year, if you waited on quarterback and waited beyond that middle tier of the Bradys and the Staffords and the Wilsons and the Rodgers, and you wound up with Kirk Cousins, you ended up winning that part of that negotiation as far as when to take a quarterback.
Better than my Russell Wilson pick.
Well, don't worry, you're not alone there. So I want your thoughts on Justin Fields, and then I'll chime in because this one has me energized. What are your thoughts on Justin Fields right now?
I feel like we've seen this emergence of the quarterback, and I think it started right around the time he said he was getting sick of hearing that they were just this close. Yeah. You remember when he said that, and all of a sudden they seemed to turn a corner, and I don't know if they let him loose a little bit more. I feel like he's playing a little bit freer as a quarterback, feels more comfortable doing the things he wants to do and not being forced to hand the ball off all the time. I was just kind of looking ahead to who they're facing, and it goes Miami, Detroit, Atlanta, the Jets, Green Bay, not scaring anybody right now. I mean, it's not till the end of the season. They're going to win some games, and he's got an opportunity to put up some fantasy points.
So I'm super, super energized by this from Justin Fields over the past 4 games. And sample sizes are really tricky. You got to be careful with them, but hear me out. So Justin Fields, in his first 4 games, did not have more than 13.64 fantasy points. So nothing great, right?
Right, because they were running.
And 2 of those 4 games, he had single-digit fantasy points. So for 4 weeks, not useful. The past 4 weeks, he has at least 17 fantasy points in each of them. And more recently, he's been awesome. Over the past 3 weeks, he's rushed the football 34 times. That's most amongst all quarterbacks. He actually has 230 rushing yards, also most amongst all quarterbacks. He has the 2nd most fantasy points over the past 3 weeks of all quarterbacks. Now, before you tell me that, Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert were on buys, I'm aware of that. You are correct. But still, we're talking about a year in which there are no good breakthrough quarterbacks, and Justin Fields is showing some life.
And by the way, they just played the Cowboys.
And they continue to do one thing very consistently on offense. They're going to run the ball. Even when they're down big, they are going to run the football. And Jalen Hurts this year is ridiculous, next level. But if you go back and look at where Jalen Hurts was last season compared to where Justin Fields is right now, over the course of the full season, Jalen Hurts averaged about 208 passing yards last season. He had a total of 16 passing touchdowns. He had 10 rushing touchdowns and 750-ish rushing yards. So he averaged 21.7 or 21.8 fantasy points per game last year, but not a ton of passing upside, really solid running upside, and did a relatively good job of not turning the football over. Over the past 4 games, Justin Fields averaging 182 passing yards, so not quite 208, but 69.25 rushing yards per game, which was better than Jalen Hurts, who was around 52 last year. He's averaging 21.4 fantasy points, so just about 0.3 points fewer than Jalen Hurts. The challenge for Justin Fields is, of course, keeping this going over the next, what do we have, 10 games left for the Bears, or 9 games left for the Bears. But this is encouraging. Like, there is a pathway for Justin Fields, if he continues to do what he does, to be a top 10 quarterback the rest of the season.
And he's gotten in the end zone himself a couple of times. So
the confidence is obvious.
Yeah, there was definitely a switch that was flipped. The only caution on comparison to Jalen Hurts to me would be the numbers. If you look at Jalen Hurts across the season, are a little bit skewed by the back end of that year where he was dealing with that high ankle injury that he ultimately had surgery on, that I think cost him some of his yardage that he would have otherwise had with his legs. And he wasn't as efficient either near the end.
I'll put it this way. If we can get, I don't even need 21.4 fantasy points per game from Justin Fields to feel good about this. If you're getting 18, then you feel great right now because of the fact that he was undrafted for the most part coming into the season. It just looks like a different player, and I love that from Justin Fields. Jared Goff, Stephania, has really tapered off after a hot start. We're past the Jared Goff experiment,
can we
right?
Move on?
Yeah, I think so. And then we'll just finish up with Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. And just quickly, I know, but still, he gets it, right? What do you think? He has one passing touchdown over the past 3 games. One. So let's just quickly wrap up with Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers, Stephania. Any hope for either one of them, or is there hope for one more so than the other?
I'm not investing in them. Why would you? At this point, you're halfway through the season. You haven't seen anything consistent out of either one of them. I don't love it. Maybe Brady can have a better back half of the season, and some of the injured players are expected to come back, but I don't really look. I think there are better options that you can still stream. We just gave you a couple. And by the way, you know who's not on the list?
Who's that?
Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah.
Who just
might deserve to be.
Yeah. I think if you were wondering, if you watched that game against the Rams, he actually had, I think, his best performance of the year. He was very efficient. They're going to throw the ball more, and those passes to Christian McCaffrey count, and you get the yards after the catch benefit. So,
I actually have, and it's going to sound crazy, and I'm not sure this is the week that I should be saying this. I actually have some confidence in Brady going forward. And I guess having confidence in Tom Brady should not be like that hot of a take, right? But Tom Brady does have at least 290 passing yards in 4 of his past 5 games. It's the touchdown passes that just aren't there for Brady. He's middle of the pack this year.
He got hurt last week. It would have looked a lot better if there was no drop.
Well, think about this. Back-to-back weeks where Mike Evans has a wide open 64-yard touchdown pass. Literally 11 yards of separation. He makes that play 1,000 out of 1,000 times.
That would be a throwing touchdown score plus
64 yards. Yep.
So it's like 10 points right there.
And this past week for Brady.
Or not 10.
But whatever. 7.5, 8.5 for Brady.
Math
but
is
still,
hard.
Whatever. You went to Prince. It's no big deal. In this past week, again, Brady opening drive against the Ravens, wide open Mike Evans, and then Brady floats one over Evans. He makes that throw 1,000 out of 1,000 times. So there are things that are no, I'm calling it 1,000 out of 1,000. But like my point is simply to note that while others like Josh Allen have not yet played the same number of games as Brady because Allen's had his bye and Brady has not, if the tide turns and some of these things that you just totally reasonably expect happen from Brady and the Bucs pass catchers, the tenor could change pretty dramatically on Brady.
Sure.
They play the Rams this weekend. Not exactly a defense that's not a cakewalk, right? I know they did get tractor trucked by your team this past week, but this is I think a solid Rams defense that certainly knows Tom Brady well and has played him pretty well. I think better days are ahead for Brady. And I know, like, if you've been starting him in spite of him.
disagree with you on the football side, but for fantasy purposes, why am I taking that chance right now?
Because there's so few other options. That's why. Right? Is that like if you
have Jimmy Garoppolo or Tom Brady available next week, who do you take?
I would take Brady over Jimmy G this week. Well, obviously bye week. So you're saying they're coming out of the bye week?
Yeah, coming out of the
bye week. I don't know who they play.
This week you take Brady.
Whoever, let me see the Bucs. Let me just look this up while I have the ESPN app. It's a great app. You should always make sure that you have it if you don't have it already. So in week 10, the Bucs play, is that the Germany game? The Bucs play week 10 Seahawks. Yeah, I start Brady big time in that game. So, yeah, I think better days are ahead here for Brady. That's all I'm trying to say as we continue to navigate things with these quarterbacks. And unless the Packers find a way to trade for Cooper Kupp today, not happening with Aaron Rodgers.
Jimmy's got a pretty good schedule.
Not happening.
All right.
Let's come back and talk about running backs in just a second. Before we do that, Stephania, can you tell me about Geico first?
Field, I can tell you about Geico.
Okay, great.
Did you know Geico asks, how would you love a chance to save some money on insurance?
As much as I would like Tom Brady to turn things around.
Of course you would. And when it comes to great rates on insurance, Geico can help, like with insurance for your car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and RV. Even help with homeowners or renters coverage. Plus, add an easy-to-use mobile app, available 24-hour roadside assistance and more, and Geico is an easy choice. Switch today and see all the ways you could save. It's easy. Simply go to geico.com or contact your local agent today.
True fans know there are only two seasons, fantasy football season and waiting for fantasy football season. But truly the best part about this time of the year is enjoying all the action with great friends and enjoying the great taste of a Hall of Fame-worthy beer at your side. That's why win or lose, game time is Miller time. We are talking about the perfect beer for Sundays and Mondays and Thursdays. Basically, if there's football on your TV, a Miller Lite is in your hands is the play. Dependable taste, low on calories, and high on praise from those at your party. What's not to like? When good friends, great beer, and football collide, that's Miller time. From kickoff through halftime and even into overtime, Miller Lite has the winning taste beer drinkers look for in a light beer. The best part, no matter how your team plays, Miller Lite is always a winner. This football season, enjoy the sweet taste of victory with Miller Lite, the original light beer. Find it pretty much anywhere beer is sold, or go to MillerLite.com/FFF for delivery options near you. It's Miller time. Celebrate responsibly. Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 96 calories and 3.2 carbs per 12 ounces. All right, so we're back here. Let's talk running backs. And quarterback's just the weirdest position of the season. All right, so let's talk about running backs then. And Stephania, and some of it's based off of performance, some of it's based off of context, but just your general confidence for these players going into the rest of the season. Let's begin with Ezekiel Elliott. And I think the reason why Zeke is so intriguing, Stephania, is because we just saw Tony Pollard go ham. He was awesome this past Sunday. Again, he looked remarkable. Now, if you heard Jerry Jones, he made it very clear that's not going to change anything. Do you buy it from Jerry?
Yes, until they show differently, because this is what the Cowboys have always done. Now, Tony Pollard has shown us some things. This last week, I think, was his best performance that I've ever seen from him. But if you look, he still only carried the ball 14 times. And a week before that, it was 13 or 12, and the week before that it was 11. So it's not that far off the mark, and excuse me, in terms of the work that he normally does, and only one catch. He did a ton with the opportunities he had. They still love Zeke in certain situations. You know who else loves Zeke, Field? Dak loves Zeke. And I do think that their best performance, and we started to see it before Zeke got hurt last year, and I just feel like we didn't get to see it enough. Their best performance as an offense comes when they have both these players available to them. And for that reason, I don't think it's going to be a case of Zeke's not going to play. Here's the thing, though. He's got an injury, and he's maybe going to come back in week 10 after the bye week. But if he doesn't come back, if he comes back and looks like Zeke last year coming back from injury, I think they're going to shift to Pollard.
Here's what I believe.
More and more.
I believe that if only Tony Pollard was available to the Cowboys, he would have top 10 running back upside. I believe that if only Ezekiel Elliott were available to the Cowboys, he would have top 20 running back upside. I believe that when both of them are available, they take away the upside from each other. Zeke still has slightly more upside because of the fact that the Cowboys are, in my opinion, irrationally committed to Zeke as their lead back, but it's not my decision to decide how they divvy up carries. So Zeke at RB25 at 11.1 fantasy points per game will continue to be what he was prior to the injury, in my estimation, once he returns, assuming that he comes back at full strength and not coming back, gimping around. So my thought here is this. A little bit of clarity would go a long way. It's not going to happen, though. The Cowboys are going to keep Zeke back in the fold, maybe as soon as after the bye week.
Here's the question for fantasy purposes, though. Before we talked about Tony Pollard not necessarily being startable on his own. Assuming that Zeke comes back week 10, what do you think?
Flex them both. That's what you have to do. Yep. That's my confidence. My confidence is meh. My confidence is boring. My confidence is I can maybe get, 12, 15, maybe 18 points on a good week, but these guys are not. We're starting to see an elite tier of running backs reestablish themselves. We got some guys that are just balling out right now. The only way that there could be a ball out running back in the Cowboys backfield would be if it was just, but it was specifically just Tony Pollard.
Yeah.
How about David Montgomery, Stephania? Because I thought something was interesting was that Khalil Herbert ended up playing well last week for the Bears, but it was a pretty steady dose of David Montgomery early. He's a really good player. Let's just dive into both of these guys. Yeah. Value here. This strikes me as fairly similar to the Cowboys situation.
I agree. The problem is that the start of the year, we thought it was all Montgomery and Herbert was just, a compliment or a change of pace. And then Herbert played too well for that to be the case. And all of a sudden it started being, well, maybe this is going to be divided up a little bit more between these two backs. And I felt like the shine on David Montgomery had worn off a little bit. But he's still touching the ball. 15 carries to start this game. Yeah. He's still very much involved in the offense, but I don't know how to read it consistently going forward. And I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, same thing here, right? Like both of them are going to get work. Montgomery probably more than Herbert in most weeks. It caps the upside for both of them. I actually think David Montgomery is a really good player. I think, though, just based off of the explosiveness, if David Montgomery had the job by himself, he'd have like top 15 upside. If Khalil Herbert had the job by himself, he might have top 20 upside. The good news here is that they are one of the run-heaviest teams in the NFL. Only the Falcons run the football in a higher percentage of their called plays. So the good news is, Stephania, that even if both of them are split, even if they are splitting duties, you can count on a pretty steady workload. And it doesn't matter if they're playing from behind. They're still running the football a ton. Let's hope that doesn't change for the purposes of fantasy because, as we know, in the past week, they have traded away both their best pass rusher in Robert Quinn and their best defensive player overall in Roquan Smith. So it could be that they have some shootout games.
Yeah, situations.
Could be that way going forward. All right, so two other players here as far as running backs are concerned, Stephania, and I'm trying. I don't want to take the cheese here, but this was good. How confident are you, though?
It's the Panthers, so I just don't have a ton of confidence in their offense as a whole. And who's their quarterback going to be?
It's going to be PJ Walker going forward.
For sure.
Say for this week, they did announce for this week.
But that's what I mean. Like if we're looking at like back half of the season, I don't know what happens here. I will say D'Onta Foreman, you and I were watching this game together and we kept looking up, like he looked really good.
Yeah.
He looked the part of a lead running back. He looked the part of what he's done with other teams in the past.
Yes, he did.
But can he do that? Was that a 1 week wonder or is that going to be a consistency?
So I actually think he'll continue to run the football well. The huge problem here with D'Onta Foreman is that part of you wants to be like, wow, like top 15 running back. He was RB5 this past week, and he was great the week prior to that. Very, very little passing game utilization. He had 0 in week 8. And I know that we harp on this all the time for running backs, but just imagine that if D'Onta Foreman, because of game script, they play the Bengals this week. Let's say the Bengals bounce back. And who knows? We'll see after last night. But let's say the Bengals bounce back and D'Onta Foreman gets 15 carries as opposed to 26 carries. And those 15 carries go for a very respectable 75 yards, but no catches. That's 7.5 fantasy points, right? That's a player that you don't really want to have in your lineup. So the passing game utilization does concern me, as does the fact that Chuba Hubbard is expected back this week, according to Chuba Hubbard himself yesterday. At least he suggested that.
We'll see.
So we'll see, but he suggested he could be back sooner than later. So I have D'Onta Foreman as a flex consideration. He was like, I'm coming back. I've got him as a flex consideration, do I, for D'Onta Foreman. And then James Robinson, Stephania. He was outsnapped by Michael Carter 32-12 on Sunday.
He just got there. It's hard. This one's hard to interpret because you don't know how much they're going to lean on him. We saw James Robinson start the season and look fantastic coming off that Achilles repair. And then Travis Etienne just kind of gradually scooped up more and more of the usage, and Jacksonville felt free to depart with James Robinson. I don't know how He's not going to be Breece Hall. You know, they do love Michael Carter.
Yeah.
Not enough to have him be the heartbeat anymore when Breece Hall showed what he could do.
Yeah.
But I don't really know where the utilization comes in. It's too early. I mean, like I said, he just got there.
Yeah, he just got there, and I do think he'll end up playing a larger role. There's a reason why the Jets traded for him. I think the mitigating factors are that, again, passing game utilization is going to be a problem. Jets offense right now, not exactly the shining star.
They may decide after Zach Wilson that they're going to try and run the ball down people's throats.
You know what's crazy? It had to be the Hollowest 330 some yards. Yeah. He threw for 330 yards on Sunday.
He did, but he also probably would have been 400 with a bunch going to the other team.
I was going to say, how many, if you just count the yards of the Patriots, it might have been an NFL record, right? So I have James Robinson as, for now, again, until we see that thing turn. And by the way, they play the Bills on Sunday. I ain't playing them this weekend. Yeah, no, so don't even bother.
This might not be the week.
This is not the week, and there are some limiting factors here. I think he's we're hoping that he creeps into the flex conversation as the schedule evens out a bit and the Jets offense hopefully finds its footing a little bit more. Let's talk about a couple more wide receivers here, Stephania, or some more wide receivers, I should say. And positive. Let's talk positive. I know they're on a bye this week, but Brandon Ayuk piecing it together here.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of maturity for Brandon Ayuk over the course of what happened last year to this year. For people who may not remember, he and Kyle Shanahan were not quite on the same page when the season started last year, and he was effectively benched, even though he wasn't necessarily literally benched, but he was not involved in the offense until the back half of the season. And then when Deebo Samuel was hurt, Brandon Ayuk really got into a flow with Jimmy Garoppolo. Interestingly, he spent a lot of the offseason working with Trey Lance, and Trey Lance loved Brandon Ayuk coming into this season, thought he was going to have a monster year. Trey Lance gets hurt. You wonder, can he rekindle that with Jimmy Garoppolo? And I think the presence of Christian McCaffrey only enhances the opportunity for Brandon Ayuk. Now, Deebo Samuel was out this week with a hamstring issue. Hopefully he comes back. I still think Brandon Ayuk stays relevant. What do you say?
I do as well. Yeah, I think this offense has kind of continued to find its way here. And because of other injuries beyond Deebo Samuel, it sounds like a lot of these guys could be back. But Juwan Jennings, that means more time for Brandon Ayuk, right? I mean,
they're hoping to get a lot. If you look at who they expect back after the bye, it's almost, they actually, and by the way, did you see Kyle Shanahan after this game? His favorite part of the presser was, I have no injuries to report. And he goes, it feels awkward. Yeah, that's how uncomfortable he is with having no injuries on the post-game report. But they actually think they're getting all but I think 2 of their players back. And Elijah Mitchell is probably coming back from IR at some point.
They are going to be loaded at some point offensively. But I think the offense is good enough to sustain Deebo, CMC, Ayuk where he is, which are maybe a little bit lower than a top 15 wide receiver weekly, but a usable piece, no doubt. And George Kittle to have some breakout games here or there. And Kittle certainly has looked better of late.
Had one just this week.
He did. Christian Kirk, Stephania, is trending in the wrong direction. Yeah. So I guess it's kind of a matter of how you want to look at this thing. He has 7 targets or a touchdown in 7 of 8 games this season. The problem is that in a bad matchup, which we knew thanks to Mike going into the game this past Sunday, he had 7 fantasy points against Denver, and he has 11 fantasy points or fewer in 4 of his past 5 games. I think with Christian Kirk is that in some ways, the way you feel about him now is him being a victim of his own early success. Right, because he was so good coming out of the gates, and you were like, wow, this Jaguars offense is clicking, and the Doug Peterson impact, and maybe they actually got a bargain and not necessarily an overpaying Christian Kirk.
He set the market for the wide receiver. Do you remember when that happened? We were all like, wow, they're paying him a lot of money. That's crazy. Yeah. And then he was the guy for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think, though, that where he levels off at is like a deeper league wide receiver 2, maybe a top end wide receiver 3, or a flex consideration, right? As we go back to what we knew about Christian Kirk coming into this season and go back to what we believed about this Jaguars offense coming into this season, is that he's a solid player, right?
I think it speaks to the offense as a whole, too.
Yeah, well, he's a solid player, and the offense right now, not exactly putting it together, right? I mean, I don't know exactly what the root of that is. None of the second-year quarterbacks are really playing that well right now. We did have some praise for Justin Fields earlier, but it's not like any of them have proven that, we don't have a Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert situation for these and Tua, by the way, for that matter, for these year 2 quarterbacks, right? So Trevor certainly has plenty of upside going forward, but it's not like you're saying to yourself with Christian Kirk, he's got a franchise signal caller who, any guy who's attached to Trevor Lawrence automatically has fantasy relevance, right? That's not the case right now for Christian Kirk.
And by the way, for people who are quitting on Trevor Lawrence already, let's not forget what he went through last year. I mean, to me, that was basically a lost season. Now starting a new offense with a coach, Doug Peterson, who I think will help Trevor Lawrence find his way. But I kind of treat this like his rookie year, so the ups and downs aren't that surprising to me.
Yeah, they're to be expected in some ways. I think the problem, and I just said that Christian Kirk was in some ways a byproduct of his own early success. This probably isn't fair, but it's just how the world works, is that Trevor Lawrence was billed, not by Trevor Lawrence himself, but by everybody, as this prodigious, can't-miss prospect who had the chance to be the best player entering the draft since Andrew Luck. And Andrew Luck, despite terrible rosters around him, immediately made the Colts a playoff contender. They made the playoffs right away. God, do I miss Andrew Luck. How awesome is that guy? He's the best. He was so fun, right? And that's the problem, is that he's fighting. That's the battle. That's the stream that he's swimming in. It's a perception battle.
I think if anybody who paid attention to what was going on at Jacksonville last year, I don't think that's totally fair. Let's
talk about a couple more wide receivers here. Let's move to Terry McLaurin, who over the past couple of games has been good, Stephania. Yeah. And I don't know if this is oversimplifying it too much, but over his 2 games with Taylor Heineke as the starting quarterback,
I was just going to say that's
the 8 targets in each game. 8 targets in each game.
I think as simple as that, switching the quarterback, it's not a surprise.
No Jahan Dotson as well, which is one less playmaker on the field.
True, but I think that Heineke and McLaurin have a connection. I
like built it last year, and I will say this is that I am optimistic here because he's so. I know he says he's so good,
he's
right?
Too good not to be used.
His play on Sunday
way.
Was ridiculous. Like the stuff that he was doing against an awesome Colts defense, not to that's don't sneeze at that production over the past couple of games. And this might be anecdotal more than something you can prove statistically. It just feels like the offense, there's so much more cut it loose with Taylor Heineke.
Totally.
Improv, take some shots, take some risk. And you know what? He might have a blow-up moment. But with Carson Wentz, it just looked deflated at the end of his time as a starter before he got hurt.
There's a pattern there.
Seems to be that the clock ticks faster on Carson Wentz than others. So I'm optimistic on Terry McLaurin going forward. I would still want we still want more touchdowns here, but things have turned in the right direction here for him. He'll be a top 20, probably top 25-ish play this week for me. The Commanders now 4-4, pretty impressively for the Commanders to get back to 4-4 after a 1-4 start to the season. And not exactly the same thing, but a similar situation, I would say, for DJ Moore in Carolina, right? A quarterback change that was 1 week prior to the Washington quarterback change. But over the past 2 weeks, how good has DJ Moore been? He has been spectacular for them.
We couldn't even talk about him before.
I know. He was like
on the milk carton,
He seriously
and now all
was.
of a sudden, DJ Moore is in contention to be on your roster on any given week.
Yeah, he's been awesome. And back-to-back games with 19.6 or more fantasy points. And here's the stuff that really matters is I think there are sort of 3 factors that contribute to DJ Moore's recent boom. One, DJ Moore is DJ Moore. He's awesome, right? I mean, there's a reason why.
Didn't go anywhere.
Of course. They got paid $60 million this offseason for a reason. Number 2, the quarterback switch, because back to cutting it loose and making good decisions, PJ Walker, who was not good in week 1, as his first week, I should say, has been much better, playing with some real confidence over the past 2 weeks. And then number 3, over the past 2 weeks, a very important factor change for the Panthers. Christian McCaffrey's no longer there.
Right.
10 targets, 11 targets for DJ Moore. Not that he plays the Christian McCaffrey role, but just as I mentioned, Deontay Foreman.
There's just more balls to go around because Christian McCaffrey, although, Christian McCaffrey wasn't getting as much in the passing game as we thought he should.
But even if he had 7 targets in a game, that's 7 that Deontay Foreman is not getting right now. Who's getting those 7? Somebody has to, and it has been DJ Moore. Maybe worth noting that Robbie Anderson also recently got traded. Terrace Marshall Jr., I see you out there. So I'm optimistic on DJ Moore here,
Walker too. I think just you mentioned the confidence, like the comfort is nothing to lose, right? I mean, clearly he has a chance to keep this, I think, to keep this job.
And by the way, people can tell me but what if he doesn't have that Hail Mary pass at the end of the game last week? He was up near 100 yards before that Hail Mary catch. So it's not like the Hail Mary was the only thing that salvaged the day for DJ Moore. Stock is up here for both DJ Moore and Terry McLaren. All right, we're going to come back and do, you know what? Let's do our Little Caesars preview right now. And the Little Caesars preview is brought to you by Little Caesars. It's game day with Little Caesars, the official pizza sponsor of the NFL. So Thursday night football, I'm sorry, Texans. Houston Texans playing host to the Philadelphia Eagles, 7-0 against 5-1. This is potential, but and here's the deal. You're starting all your Eagles, obviously, right? I mean, Jalen Hurts going to have a monster night, but maybe this is a get-right name for Devontae Smith, right? And the problem with Devontae is that, not Devontae himself,
it's not Devontae.
It's like they just got a bunch of alphas on that roster, right? I mean, the way that A.J. Brown is playing, can he get right? And I'm not going to go as far on Thursday night as not starting Dameon Pierce. I do get a little bit worried about this game just getting ridiculously out of hand. And you know what? I take that back because maybe Dameon Pierce gets 8 catches on Thursday night.
I was going to say, he's still probably going to be your number one target all the way around.
All right, so the Thursday night, we got a couple different things to watch. Philly's going to be crazy on Thursday between the Eagles, the Phillies playing the World Series at home on Thursday night. Now that there was the rain out last night, and then the Eagles playing in Houston on Thursday night, could be a big, big Thursday night for the city of Philadelphia. On Sunday, I got a couple of questions here. Can Davante Adams recover? They play the Saints on Sunday. They're spending the week. They play the Jaguars on Sunday after playing the Saints. They're spending the week on the East Coast. Teams often do that when they play back-to-back games on the opposite coast. And there's no explanation for the Raiders this past Sunday.
I thought this was going to be a big Davante Adams game.
No, Marshawn Lattimore. That was supposed to be the case, right?
And we talked about that.
It was not the case for Davante Adams. It's really a dud. It's every year there's something that just goofs, and that was the goof game for Davante Adams. But in that same game, does Travis Etienne continue to assert himself as a top 10 fantasy running back option? So good this past week. 24 carries. Me as well. 156 rushing yards for Travis Etienne. There's only one bag not in the trick, or one trick not in the bag yet for Travis Etienne, which is big plays in the passing game. He had 3 catches for 6 yards this past week. I'm not going to be mad about the production we saw if he get it again this week, but still, if he gets some big play opportunities in the passing game, design screens, things that you can allow him to tap in, I sure hope so. And if he does, watch out for Travis Etienne. And then Monday night, how fun will this one be? In New Orleans, Baltimore Ravens traveling down there. That'd be awesome. Lamar Jackson, Alvin Kamara in the same game. Yes, please. But Kamara is back, Stephania, because all of last year, 47 catches. The first 2 games of this year, 5 catches. Since then, he has been on a tear, has Alvin Kamara. 6, 6, 7, and 9. That's how many catches Alvin Kamara has had over his past 4 games. That happens to coincide with Andy Dalton taking over as the starter. That's part of it. Obviously, no Jarvis Landry, no Mike Thomas is part of it as well. Do we have any sense on Michael Thomas?
None. I just don't see anything in the near future.
Fantasy football boogeyman, right?
Yeah, it's not going to be Michael Thomas. Jarvis Landry's still banged up. Chris Olave's Chris Olave, but Alvin Kamara finally being utilized in the Alvin Kamara way. And I agree with you. As long as Andy Dalton's there, which it seems to be the plan going forward, Alvin Kamara has returned to the Alvin Kamara we used to know. That is a great, great thing. We're going to talk about waiver wire ads with Eric Moody in just a second. But first, Stephania, I would like a Dr. Pepper. So would I, Field.
Delicious.
And you know, it's the most wonderful time of year that's upon us again, college football season. Dr. Pepper and the residents of Fansville invite you to revel in another one-of-a-kind year of flexing your foam finger, humming your school's fight song in your sleep, and thriving on a steady diet of buffalo chicken dip and post-game day commentary, all washed down with the rich, delicious Dr. Pepper, of course. Another Saturday is always just around the corner, so make sure your tailgate doesn't turn into a failgate and pick up a case of ice-cold Dr. Pepper, the one fans deserve. Are you wasting money on subscriptions? 80% of people have subscriptions they forget about. Maybe for you, it's an unused Amazon Prime account or a Hulu account that never gets streamed. There's this great app I use that helps me track all of my expenses, and because of it, I no longer waste money on subscriptions I don't even use. You might have heard of it. It's called Rocket Money, formerly known as Truebill. The app shows you all your subscriptions in one place and then cancels for you whatever you still don't want. Rocket Money can even find subscriptions you didn't know you were paying for. You may even find out you've been double charged for a subscription. To cancel a subscription, all you have to do is press cancel, and Rocket Money takes care of the rest.
Get rid of useless subscriptions with Rocket Money now. Go to rocketmoney.com/FFF. Seriously, this could save you hundreds of dollars per year. That's rocketmoney.com/FFF. Cancel your unnecessary subscriptions right now at rocketmoney.com/FFF. We are back, and it's time for the moment you've all been waiting for. We get to say hello to our friend Eric Moody, who is here to help us out with the waiver wires for Week 9. Moody, before we say that, first of all, great to talk to you. Did the family dress up last night? And if so, what'd you guys go as?
Yeah, we did dress up. So my son was dressed up as a werewolf. My daughter was Spider-Gwen. And my wife dressed up as a referee. I, unfortunately, feel I did not have a costume, so I guess I went dressed up as myself.
Okay, you went dressed up as yourself. Daniel Dopp also went dressed up as a werewolf. He just walked outside, and people were like, oh, my God, all that hair and the beard. Just kidding. We love Daniel. Let's talk about waivers, and let's dive into Week 9 options here, Eric. We'll start at quarterback. We talked about him earlier on in the show, but how impressive is Justin Fields right now?
No, Justin Fields is very impressive. What I like is that he's shown improvement in multiple areas, each and every week. He's a QB2 right now over the past 3 weeks. And I look at Fields' numbers. I'm like, he has now scored 17 or more fantasy points in 4 consecutive games. And that also includes 23 or more points in the last 2 contests. And he's got a great matchup, this week going up against the Miami Dolphins defense, a defense that surrendered 362.8 total yards per game so far for this season. And so I'm looking at Fields as I would say a high-end QB2, but with QB1 upside.
He has been really, really good. I talked about it all earlier, so check out that portion of the show if you haven't already seen it. Let's keep it in the same division, though, and I think you and I might see this player a bit differently. Are you confident in Jared Goff?
Oh, that's an intriguing word, saying confident. I suppose, just given how all these bye weeks that are going on right now. But I'll tell you, Field, I almost feel like Michael Corleone from like The Godfather Part 3, where he's just like, I thought I was out on Jared Goff, yet they keep pulling me back in. And so I think he should be considered. He's a firm QB2, obviously with QB1 upside at home against the Packers. One thing about Goff is that he's performed much better at home relative to on the road. Like he's actually averaging like 23.3 fantasy points per game at home. He's got Amon-Ra St. Brown back. He's got DeAndre Swift that's there as well now. Hawkinson. So I do like Goff, but I do like Justin Fields more.
Okay, I agree with you. I like Justin Fields more than Jared Goff, who has just 1 touchdown in his past 98 attempts. So things have kind of cooled off there for that Lions offense in general. I know the first half against Miami was sweet, but if you got 2 good running backs who can certainly take care of the job at the goal line in Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift, let's talk running backs. And typically, Moody, this time of the year is not when you find diamond in the roughs on the waiver wire for running backs. The only way that happens is because of injuries or major trades. Neither of those took place this past weekend. So who's a running back that maybe tickles your fancy a little bit on the waiver wire?
Oh, yeah, I got a name for you, and it should be on everyone's radar, and that is Khalil Herbert with the Chicago Bears. Now, it's one of the rare situations for where coach speak actually took place and transpired, for where the Bears coaching staff were like, we need to get Herbert more involved. And we're like, okay, we'll believe it when we see it. But we've actually seen it, and Herbert's looked phenomenal. I would say the 4 games when you look at Herbert, where he's had double-digit rushing attempts, like he's averaged 18.4 fantasy points per game. And so I know David Montgomery will still be involved. I know you, Field, and Stephania were talking about Montgomery a moment ago. But I'm looking at Herbert. I'm like, he's someone that I'm viewing as a flex option with upside. I'm like, he's looked great, and I think he'll continue to improve.
He has been really, really good of late, and we talked about how just dedicated they are to running the ball. And even if the defense does take a step back with no Robert Quinn and no Roquan Smith, I wouldn't be surprised if they continue to run the football. There were some games on the schedule that Stephania read that made me think they could stay in them with either a neutral game script or perhaps even a positive game script. How about in Carolina? Do you think that right now it is not the Deontay Foreman job to himself, or could he be the guy that takes it for the rest of the season on his own?
Yeah, and you look at Foreman's performance. I'm like, it was impressive. I'm like, he helped win weeks for fantasy managers. But I would say that Hubbard, will end up being involved. Chuba Hubbard, and one thing about the Panthers, I'm like, they ran the football, 36 times against the Falcons. And one thing about Foreman, like, he doesn't catch the ball out of the backfield a ton. Like, in the last 2 games, he's rarely played on third down. So I do believe that's a void that Hubbard could fill, as the receiving back out of the backfield, and also just help take some of the workload away from Foreman. I think it's a robust running game where there'll be enough touches for both backs. But I do like Hubbard, especially if you're in a bind and you need a running back considering all these bye weeks.
Okay, it is tough right now to find a running back that you can rely upon off the waiver wire. Let's get to the wide receivers, and let's begin with Rondale Moore, who a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde nature to his game of late. He had just 1 catch in week 7, but bounced back in week 8. You confident in him going forward?
I am confident. I did like what I saw from Moore last week, but I was chuckling when you mentioned the Jekyll and Hyde scenario, because I was sitting there thinking, as you said that, I remember writing about Moore in the waiver wire column. Then that week, he kind of laid an egg, so to speak, and then he had this masterful performance on Sunday. But one thing about Moore, I'm like, he's had 8 or more targets in 3 of his past 4 games. I'm like, he also has a 25 or more yard reception in 4 straight games as well. And one thing I noticed once they picked up, the Cardinals that is, picked up Robbie Anderson, I'm like, he's only had 4 targets in his first 2 games with the team. And so you got the Seahawks that are on deck for this week. Very favorable matchup for Moore. He's someone that I'm viewing like as a flex option with upside, because he really has that number 2 wide receiver spot alongside DeAndre Hopkins solidified, and he'll hold it until Marquise Brown returns from that foot injury.
Let's wrap things up on the waiver wire here with another wide receiver, and the Packers are desperate for wide receiver help in a major way. Could you find help for your fantasy roster on the Packers roster?
I believe you can, Field, because I look at Romeo Doubs, and I know what this Packers offense has been very difficult to watch this year with Rodgers. But one thing about Doubs, I'm like, he's averaging 6.1 targets per game with Rodgers. Had a solid performance on Sunday night against the Bills. And you look at this matchup going up against Detroit, a team that allows the 6th most passing yards per game. And I just look at it this way, Field, just looking at it just straight football. It's like, I get it that Aaron Rodgers has a lot of confidence and rapport, with Allen Lazard. But the reality is, Allen Lazard can't get all the targets. He has to build trust and a relationship with other receivers on that team. And I do believe Doubs will be that consistent and reliable second option for him.
Man, they could certainly use it in Green Bay, as they are a mess right now on offense, really defense, special teams. They're 3-5. Not much is going right for the Pack. Let's talk about some players that can go right now. Do you have any names that come to mind that are rostered in a bunch of leagues, Moody, that you're like, that is just roster fat right there?
Yeah, I've got some names, and this first one I'm going to mention, this hurts me. It's very painful to say this because I was very high on this receiver entering the season. Elijah Moore comes to mind. It just doesn't seem like they want to have him involved on this team, yet they don't want to trade him. I don't think things will get better for him. Devontae Parker, comes to mind. Just a lack of pass attempts in that Patriots offense. I just don't think he'll be actively involved. 2 other names, Jeff Wilson with the 49ers. I know Stephania mentioned, and you were talking to her as well about this, Field, about Elijah Mitchell returning sooner rather than later. So it's a crowded backfield. McCaffrey's obviously going to get the load, or I would say the majority of the touches, what I want to say there. And also Hunter Renfrow. I know we were all crying in unison about Devontae Adams' performance. It was painful to watch, but it's just not going to be enough action there for Hunter Renfrow either. So those are 4 names that, unfortunately, I would drop right now.
I am so befuddled by what's happened with Hunter Renfrow, right? I know that the target volume would have expected to go down, and it has, obviously, but I thought it might be because, Devontae Adams and Darren Waller are both averaging 12 targets per game or something ridiculous. Well, Darren Waller's barely played this season, and Devontae Adams' target share certainly has been ridiculous, but you would have thought there was enough room for Devontae Adams and Hunter Renfrow. It turns out I was gravely mistaken. Never a mistake when we get to talk football with our guy, Eric Moody. Go check out the waiver wire column. Anything else you're working on these days that needs to be plugged?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing on the fantasy football front is the Daily Note. So that's published Monday through Friday. And so if you're a fantasy manager who's busy during the day and don't have time to track all the NFL news and fantasy relevant news, check out the Daily Notes. It's published on ESPN Fantasy every single morning during the weekday. A lot of great nuggets and information in there. Check it out.
Nothing better than daily fantasy football nuggets. Eric Moody has got basketball nuggets. He's Eric N. Moody on Twitter. He's the man. We appreciate you. We'll talk to you again, same time, same place next week. Good luck in your Week 9 matchups, Moody.
No, thanks, Field. Looking forward to next week as well. Take care. I'll be in touch.
Can't wait already. That is going to do it for us here on the Fantasy Focus. We are back tomorrow, Wednesday. We'll dive into the latest updates. Perhaps there'll be a trade or two that has some fantasy relevance. We've got just 5 hours and 1 minute until the trade deadline hits. Plus, we'll dive into Week 9 ranking talk and so much more. Thanks for listening. For Stephania and Eric Moody, I am Field. We're back tomorrow.